When I started Dark Souls 2 shortly after finishing the first, I was incredibly curious how it would differ from the original. I knew about its reputation, as I'm sure most people watching the video do, for Dark Souls 2 being the black sheep of the Souls and Souls-like games, dominantly due to its less interesting characters and its lack of open-endedness throughout the game, as well as the lack of interconnectivity between the game's world. To be completely honest, I was kind of dreading the experience. The reason I started Dark Souls 2 so soon was because I wanted to get through the trilogy properly, and being one of the earlier Souls games, I knew it would be one of the rougher experiences, especially if I played the latter games and then tried to go back. I'm sure you can imagine my shock when I found Dark Souls 2 to be one of the most interesting and unique Souls games so far. It twisted the formula that I had become used to into something so new but yet so familiar, while polishing a lot of the issues that I actually had with Dark Souls 1. There are multiple changes made to the game's systems and balancing, which are what I aim to explore, dissect, and compare to the original game throughout this video. For context, the only Souls-ish games I've played previously are Dark Souls 1, obviously the predecessor to the game here, and Lies of P, which is one of the most interesting, most recent, and most applauded Souls-like games. This has allowed me to gain perspective on where this genre started and where it is currently, especially so that I can compare it to Dark Souls 2. Hidetaka Miyazaki, the series creator, has stated that Dark Souls 2 was actually a great influence on how every game afterwards shaped itself, even down to little things like Elden Ring's inventory system, which is incredibly similar to Dark Souls 2's. I also played on the Scholar of the First Sin edition. It's an updated version of sorts with rearranged enemy layouts. It integrates the game's DLC into the world, as well as some other changes I don't know too much about. While I have heard that the original version of Dark Souls 2 is superior, even to the point where some people discourage others from playing Scholar of the First Sin, it is the version of the game that I bought, and it's what I believe the creators intended for you to play. The number one thing that the sequel improves on over the original is a ton of polish that was added to the game. The UI especially has gone from this gross, boxy, text-heavy menu with so much dead space to a much more refined and condensed one. While when I did start Dark Souls 2, I really didn't like it, as time went on, it became clear just how much easier it was to understand the menu, especially in stressful situations when you needed to use an item that you didn't think you would need. It also makes it easier to find your weapon when you have 500 broadswords in your inventory because you want to save them for selling later. Something that has happened to me in both Souls games now, and I'm not sure if there's any intended fix to this other than just dropping everything. While it's not incredibly annoying to deal with, it does add unnecessary clutter. If you could access a merchant to sell to earlier in the game, I think it would be heavily improved. The only reason I can think of why they didn't make this the case is to prevent you from selling all this early game equipment for Souls, the game's currency, too quickly in the start of the game. However, I would argue that this early game equipment would be sold regardless, so if it only gave even a minimal amount of Souls back, I would be happy, and it would kind of solve the issue. One of the most controversial changes in the new game was the Estus flask changes, making your health go up over time rather than nearly instant, as well as the addition of life gems, which slowly increase your health over a large amount of time. To be completely honest, I didn't really understand the importance of life gems. Maybe it's my playstyle, but I didn't really need to use life gems until late game when the bosses got a lot faster. And while the Estus definitely caused a little bit of bullshit getting hit at the worst moments with it, the way it forces you to cycle between defense and offensive play creates a new rhythm that I really appreciate. When it comes to upgrading your flask, however, I'm a little mixed on it. I think using Estus shards to increase the maximum amount you can carry and how much you gain when resting at bonfires is appreciated. The strategy of Dark Souls 1 requiring you to make a decision each bonfire, whether it's to upgrade that bonfire, was a very fun element that I missed in this new game. It's not bad, but I definitely do prefer the first game's approach in that sense. The actual way that you upgrade the Estus, though, is just flat out annoying. Throughout the world, there are 5 items, only 5, called Sublime Bone Dust, that are just placed in random places. Some are in chests, some are on the ground. And for a system with so few items that are so vastly important to be difficult to find, I found incredibly annoying. Like, at least with Estus shards, there are 11 hidden throughout the world, and your Estus is recharge at every bonfire. Having what is the staple mechanic, the Estus, of every Souls game to be so annoying to upgrade, I just despised. If I could have a system that combines the slow recharge of the Dark Souls 2 flasks and the upgrade system of the first game, I think it would be a perfect, although I'm not a game designer, so who really knows if that would really work. Dark Souls 2 starts you off in a brand new world, the Kingdom of Drangleic, where you'll explore forests, castles, swamps, and so many caves. There are so many new locations to explore, almost double the amount that the original has if you include both games' DLC. One thing I noticed throughout Dark Souls 2 is the sudden prominence of the caves. While they were in the first game, the majority of cave areas were so large or bright that they felt no different compared to the areas in the real world. I'm thinking like the Demon Ruins. In the sequel, there are so many more areas that you can barely make out, and this is where the short-lived torch mechanic comes into play. When at bonfires and some other light sources, you can light a torch that runs on a timer depending on how many torches you've picked up across the world. It's a risky game, as it takes up your left hand that would normally be reserved for a shield or a wand for magic. There are multiple fires you can light and relight your torch with, allowing you to not need it the second time running through familiar areas, and letting you continue with a torch once you reach the end of explored territory. I think this is best utilized in No Man's Wharf. Every time you make your journey back from the only bonfire in the area, you see how the area grows as more light bathes your surroundings. It feels so cool to be able to do that, and I wish there were more areas that let you get a clear view of your progress like No Man's Wharf does. Dark Souls 2 feels so much more overwhelming than the first game as well. It feels almost like I'm stuck in an asylum. Everything is maze-like and dark and usually filled with so many more enemies than the first game contains. The atmosphere oozes with personality, maybe even more than the first game does. I often found myself exploring areas with barely a clue as to where I was or what I was doing, exploring for ways out of areas and hopefully a path forward. Every fork in the road is a game of chance, where you find yourself surrounded by enemies or discovering shortcuts or items. A standout to me in particular was the gutter. Pitch black area that once you find your way in, you are stuck down there. The gutter is winding. Multiple bridges connecting different platforms surrounded with hollows and dogs and other aggressive enemies. The first time that I had ran in there, I was severely underleveled for the area, but after multiple attempts, made my way to the bonfire on the other side of the entire area. That is the best area to highlight what Dark Souls 2 is. It's messy, it's dark, and it's hostile. You'll have a second to rest before you run into something new to attack you. I try to keep certain topics sparse in Dark Souls videos because I believe that bosses in certain areas are the appeal of the game, and I wouldn't want to spoil those for you. But I will tell you this. The bullshit bosses of the original game are gone. No more unwinnable fights or bosses that can't take damage. I found most bosses in the sequel to be either adequate or even a little easy, however. Most bosses only took me like 1 to 3 tries before I had them down, using summons sometimes, but not often. Maybe I was overpowered, maybe I was lucky, but they were still decent fun throughout. I don't want to make them seem like they were terrible. And if you do buy the Scholar of the First Sin Edition, you also do get the 3 DLC packs included with the game, which I find massively improves on the bosses. These bosses in the DLC have taken me weeks to beat them, which is exactly what I want. Overall, is Dark Souls 2 worth your time in 2024? I'd say yes, but I would also say to play the first game first. Dark Souls 2 is a great game, and it does have its flaws, but I do think I like the first game better overall. However, I can't deny that it does succeed much more than it fails when I'm comparing the changes made from Dark Souls 1. However, with Dark Souls 2, 3, Lies of P even, or really any Souls game, I do think regardless, it is better to play the original Dark Souls first. Do yourself a favor and find the foundation of the Souls series before moving on to its sequels, and then you can appreciate Dark Souls 2 much better and really understand what Dark Souls 2 was going for.